Our second reading for this morning comes from 1 Kings, the 19th chapter. For reasons, exactly clear what reasons, but the lectionary kind of jumps around in the book of Kings, and we've gone forward and backwards and forward again. This is actually the reading that comes immediately on the heels of a reading we did several weeks ago, where Elijah has had a contest with the prophets, the 400 prophets of Baal, and called down fire to light the sacrifices. And at the conclusion of that, this great victory is when this story begins, when Ahab tells Jezebel what happened. So let us listen now for what the Spirit may speak to us through these words. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed the prophets of Baal with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. Horeb is another name for Sinai. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." God said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. There came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Many of you recently took a rather lengthy online survey known as the Congregational Assessment Tool, or CAT for short. But thanks to the large numbers of you who participated in the survey, we got a lot of very good information about us as a congregation. The session, the ruling council of this church, received a lengthy report with all sorts of facts and figures and charts and graphs. It's all a little overwhelming, which is why we didn't just get the report. Rather, it was interpreted to us for nearly 3 hours by people who've been trained to utilize and understand the CAT report. It's still a bit overwhelming, and the session is still grappling with exactly how to utilize this in moving forward. Now, in that initial presentation, one of those interpreters told us that he had spoken with a consultant at the company that owns and administers the CAT, who said that based on our survey results, we appeared to be a congregation that is, quote, sitting on go. We're a gifted congregation with lots of resources, lots of energy and vitality, but in some ways we are sitting at the starting gate, sitting on go. Now, I should add that these interpreters said that our report was one of the better ones they had seen among the many Presbyterian churches in this area who have taken the CAT. The sitting on go comment was not a "here's what's wrong with you" sort of comment. Rather, it was a call to a strong, gifted church to explore where we are to go and what we are to do, how we are to respond to God in order to fulfill the vast potential that the report saw in our congregation. Where to go, what to do. What does God expect of us in this time and place? Those are difficult questions at any time. But we live in a time of great uncertainties and great challenges for the church. And we live in a time when the world is brimming with hate and fear and violence. What are we to do? How are we to comfort and support our LGBTQ brothers and sisters who have just experienced this tragedy in Orlando at a place of sanctuary, a place that is supposed to be a safe place? How are we to love those who have so often experienced the hate of the world and of all too often the church? How are we to love Muslim brothers and sisters who in this time are people who Donald Trump and others like him use as political punching bags? How are we to show Christ-like love to people who are hated and feared because terrorists claim to follow their religion? Where are we to go? What are we to do about the never-ending gun violence in this country? How is God calling us to respond to the cold cynicism that says nothing will ever change. I confess that right now I don't know what to do. I feel a little numb, dejected, at times hopeless. I may even feel a renewed sense of kinship with the prophet Elijah, who seems so dejected and so hopeless that he's just ready to hang it all up. Elijah's coming off of his greatest success, the dramatic triumph over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Yahweh has been proved true God, nothing like the impotent idol Baal. But in the aftermath, Queen Jezebel has sworn to kill Elijah, and he is running for his life. As I reflect on Elijah's situation, I can't help but finding some parallels in the experience of the LGBT community. There have been a lot of successes of late. Barriers to ordination have been thrown out in our denomination. There's been a rapid change in levels of acceptance in American society, and just recently the approval of same-sex marriages. But these successes do not do away with long-running experiences of bigotry and hate, of exclusion and discrimination in the culture and in the church. And in the wake of successes have come a slew of religious freedom bills and bathroom bills. Now comes the slaughter in Orlando. In the past, I think I've tended to be dismissive of Elijah's depression that we see in our passage. I mean, he's had so many successes, so many triumphs. He's had such incredible experiences of God's presence and of God's power. How can he possibly feel hopeless? And as a straight, white, privileged male, I wonder if I haven't at times been similarly dismissive of those who in the LGBT community still feel threatened and vulnerable and fearful despite recent gains. Despite all of his triumphs and successes, Elijah has been constantly under threat. He's always been looking over his shoulder for those in power who seek to kill him. And now that Jezebel has sworn an oath to kill him before the day is out, he has had all he can take. In his distraught emotional state, he cries out to God and said, "It's enough, I want to die. Get it over with." But God is not done with Elijah. Interestingly, God does not try to talk Elijah out of his depression, out of his hopelessness. God doesn't say anything about, "Oh, there's work to do that can't wait." No. God simply sends angels to feed Elijah. And Elijah is shepherded on a long journey to the Mount of God, to the place where Moses received the commandments. Only after a long time does God finally ask, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" And Elijah responds, "The Israelites have thrown out your covenant. They have forsaken your covenant. They've thrown down your altars. They've killed your prophets by the sword. I alone am left. And that's actually not quite true, but in his emotional state, Elijah sees a bad situation as even worse than it is. God responds with a startling statement. The Lord is going to pass by, and Elijah is invited to be a witness. This has never happened to anyone except once to Moses, who saw God pass by on this very mount centuries before. But in his despair, his depression, Elijah does not move, does not go out as God said. And so he only hears the dramatic display that comes: wind, earthquake, fire. Though we are told after each one that Yahweh was not in it. Finally, there comes the sound of sheer silence. At least that's what our translation says. Some of you may be familiar with an older translation that speaks of a still small voice. There's disagreement over how to translate it, but however you render it, it doesn't seem to move Elijah at all. Nothing has changed for him. He goes outside either because it finally got quiet or because he hears something he can't quite make out. And God asks again, Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah responds exactly, word for word, as he had before. The Israelites have forsaken your covenant. They have thrown down your altars. They have killed the prophets with the sword. I alone am left. Nothing seems to be getting past his depression, getting through to Elijah, but God's care, God's presence with Elijah as he has sojourned and in the wilderness where Israel first met God, have gradually begun to do their work. Elijah does not yet seem to realize it, but he is being renewed and restored. And now God senses that it is time to rouse Elijah and says, go, anoint Hazael as king over Aram. God gives Elijah work to do. It's dangerous work. But Elijah is now ready to hear and to get up and to get going. Now, when I first started working on this sermon, and in fact in the first version of this sermon, it was all about us hearing so that we get up, get off of go, and get moving in the direction of the work that God gives to us. And indeed, the session has begun a process of listening, of seeking to discern God's call, a vision that will guide us in our work. Yet there are times when we simply need to sit and be still and rest in the unfathomable depth of God's love. In my own rush to get things done, I often forget that. And I'm thankful to Helen Wilkins for reminding me that at this moment, many people cannot and do not need to hear a call to go. They need time to reflect, to grieve. And for those in the LGBTQ community, the shooting in Orlando is a stark reminder that despite recent successes, there are many who still hate them, and some who will do them harm. And much of that hate has come out of the church. We all need to stop, to be still and reflect on that, to grieve that, to grieve Orlando, to grieve a lot more. This past Monday, a colleague posted to his Facebook page a quote from the latest book by Rob Bell. I don't know the context of the quote because I haven't read the book, but the quote reads, "What new and good thing is going to come out of even this?" That's a hard question to ask right now, maybe even an inappropriate one. But that is the promise of our God, the promise of our faith. It is the promise of resurrection, the assurance that God can bring life and newness out of even the very worst evil. But at the moment, grief is enough. Easter will come, but now is darkness. But even in the greatest and deepest darkness, the crucified one is with us. And so we trust that the light of Easter morning will break. We trust that the time will soon come when we are ready to hear. And God will speak. And we will hear. And we will go. All praise and glory to the God who comes in Christ, the crucified one, who lived and died and rose again to show us the way to new life. Thanks be to God.